Salam, friends of BookBytes. As you know, I've been having huge fun this month with some really interesting children's stories. And this evening, with nothing less of an adventure, we've got The Big Scary Adventure by Elena Bregin. She's a very well-known local editor and author. She's had numerous publications. I remember reading Survival Training for Lonely Hearts, which is one of the most brilliant novels I've ever come across in terms of its execution, and how much I loved the characters in that book. Ilana has written widely for, in different genres and for a wide audience. She's worked with various publishers, editing some of the most well-known and well-received novels in the country. So to have a copy of The Big Scary Adventure in my hands and to have enjoyed it over the last few days was nothing short of a privilege. Welcome to the show, Ilana. It's wonderful to have you on the show and to be able to discuss this very exciting new publication. Welcome to Book Bites.
Thanks, Shafi. Thanks, Shafi. It's really lovely to be here. Same screen, same time.
It's been a while. I remember doing workshops during Time of the Writer, and we had huge fun with that. So let's get right into the process. And you've written so widely. I've enjoyed your works. I recently got a package of new, your more recent material, your short stories. But The Big Scary Adventure. Tell us about the process of taking that leap from writing for adults, working on so many manuscripts, and then writing this very exciting adventure story. How do you get here?
Well, where I started off with my writing was for young adults. So the leap is not so big. And I think when you write for children, as you know so well, I think you write for the child inside. And it's just such a nice relief to put the real world away for a while and to be able to do fun things, write an adventure story where magic happens and is quite entitled to happen because it's a children's story, and just laugh to yourself while you're writing. I think out of all the books I've written, The Big Scary Adventure definitely is one that I really enjoyed writing. I put everything in it that I had enjoyed so much as a child. So it's got songs and it's got humor and it's got adventure and it's got ridiculous things and so that leap was actually a leap backwards for me, back to the time out from real world issues that you have to deal with in the adult fiction.
So let's take that leap back and say, I wasn't aware about your, where it started. Where did this start with the young adult series? What did you write, in the beginning, and how far back was that?
It was quite a way back. I think apartheid had just ended. And it was for the Mascu Miller had that wonderful Young Africa series, which is still going today, I think, under Pearson. They've changed their name. So I wrote what you might call social reality books for young adults. And the aim was to just make young adults realize how ridiculous their pretensions of superiority were. And the way to do that was to hold up the humorous looking glass for them, to see themselves but laugh at themselves. And so those were quite successful. So I got stamped for quite a while as a children's writer. In fact, it was young adult at that point. But that's where it started for me. Yeah.
So I know, I've one of your first novels that I read was Survival Training for Lonely Hearts, and I feel so much of you as a person, not your story, but just that energy of empathy and compassion, and the beauty of the story was was set in that book. Tell us a little bit about getting there, seeing as we're talking about leaps in literature.
Well, Survival Training was the other one of my books that I really enjoyed writing. part of the reason I wrote it was because I was stamped as a children's author. So I thought, okay, you want adult? I'll give you adult. So as you know, there are some very over-the-top sex scenes there, which are meant to be laughed at. And in fact, a lot of people do laugh at them. But there's this thing of identifying the author with their character. So it had that fallout, where even family were quite shocked. They hadn't known me in that capacity. But that was just an aside in that book. I really wrote that because I just loved South Africa with all its warts and its conundrums and its difficult history and its fabulous people. And all of that has gone into that book, as Dennis Beckett described it. He said it's a book about the washing machine of life. It all gets, all the dirty laundry and the clean laundry and everything else gets put together into that washing machine. So that was how I came to that. Yeah.
I think as writers, it's very often that we are sort of lumped with the material we write about. But I often say, actors are never confused with the characters they play, not mistaken for criminals if they successfully play and display the character of a criminal, for example. So we'll just keep doing what we need to do. What I enjoyed also about survival training, I remember that one of your central characters was actually a dog. And the way in which you draw that relationship and those relationships around, this probably often misunderstood animal, domestic, not so domestic. Speak to us about characterization when this sort of thing comes into play and how it was received.
Well, the dog is the one real element in the book. A lot of it was based on my own heartbreak and experience with a particular dog that really got under my skin. So, yes, for me, the dog is just as much of a legitimate character as any of the others. And I think, you say actors are not confused with their characters. I think in order to do character well, whether you're an actor or a writer, you've really got to slip into the skin of your character. You have to write it from the inside. So the character has to pre-exist in you in some way or another. And I suppose there is no such thing as fiction. Everything we write draws on experience of some kind or another, whether it's ours, whether it's found experience, whether it's the story of somebody that we know or encountered at some point, and we weave that all together in a way that is indistinguishable. And that's partly the enjoyment, don't you think, Shafi, of writing, is
Absolutely.
that you get
in poetry and in music and in writing as well.
You get to draw on those emotions and you get to draw on those experiences, however far removed or however close they are, and put them in disguise into your books.
I think it's easy for the line to be blurred between what we create and who we are. But inevitably, something of ourselves comes through in the writing. Just that I think the big challenge is not having each character be sort of a caricature of yourself, extending yourself, but not really putting yourself out there in every single character. We can be a bit judgmental as writers, don't you think?
I do, and I also think it gets very boring if all that you're writing about is yourself. Part of the joy of writing is putting yourself into different shoes. You want to escape from yourself sometimes, and so you concoct. I mean, it's a little bit like being God, isn't it? You get to say how the character's life ends. You can make them walk the walk. But in the end, you want them to have a happy life. And if you can't orchestrate that in real life. It's just wonderful to be able to orchestrate it in fiction.
And fiction does allow, I think it's a lot more forgiving than reality anyway.
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
You alluded to what I think is building bridges of empathy when we write fiction. And you've done this so beautifully with The Big Scary Adventure, bringing us back to this. I know you've written a lot in between. This Shiva's Dance, there's The End Bear Cabin, and, some of your more recent works. But in The Big Scary Adventure, what I found particularly meaningful was that you're building empathy for your readers, young readers especially, towards animals, different kinds of animals, and you're allowing them this adventure where they have sort of, they take on this role of the hero. So let's talk about that. I mean, writing for children, as much as it's fun, there's a certain amount of responsibility. Let's talk about your thematic considerations in The Big Scary Adventure.
Yeah, look, part of the reason why I wrote it is that I really think that the kids growing up today have had so little contact with nature, with animals, with creatures that are the mainstay of our world. And I don't know if you've encountered Richard Louve's book, Last Child in the Woods, where he speaks about in America that this generation growing up now are growing up without any woods, and how indispensable nature is to the development of children. Physically, because they get to run and play and use their ingenuity. Emotionally, because there's a natural bond between children and nature and animals, and all of that is being lost. So for me, this was in a way a necessary rewilding. It was me passing on my own experience and love for the wild and for wilderness and for sitting out in the darkness around a fire with a sky full of stars. And I don't think kids easily get that experience today. Many kids, a lot of kids. So I wanted them to be switched on vicariously, and also just to, I'm very worried by the extent to which not just kids but adults as well are just so terrified of creatures, of any life form that is not human. And we really need those creatures, as we know, for the sustaining of our world. And when you really look at them, they are just remarkable and wonderful. So I wanted to put my characters in a situation, especially the lead, Jasper. He's really the anti-hero. He doesn't want to go on the adventure. He only goes because he thinks it's all a big joke. And Londi, who's the main mover and shaker on the adventure, she just doesn't give him any slack. He's just kind of yanked into self-realization and just opening his eyes to the truth of things. So I really enjoyed that. I enjoyed the remaking of people into heroes, into the heroic, that they don't even realize that they've got in them. So that's The Big Scary Adventure for me. And I must say, it's had a really nice response, especially from that kind of 9-10-year-old age group. A lot of very reluctant reader boys have come reluctantly to The Big Scary Adventure and loved it and read it more than once. And it's switched them on a little bit to the fact that reading can really be a fun adventure.
And I think it's important that we get that sort of re-engage that reading culture and that love of reading and that love of story for children. But one of the parts that I really enjoyed right in the beginning of the story was when you talk about them becoming the communicator, and you use a capital letter, so it's a big deal for them to not just speak human to each other, but to be able to communicate with each animal. And this is where that empathy bridge comes in, because
Yeah.
Jasper starts to be able to read what the owl is saying and what the dog is saying and what each of these animals is saying, thinking, feeling. I thought that was fantastic, allowing them that feeling that you can communicate if you have empathy with each of these animals. It's very very powerful method that you've used here.
Yeah, and it's also very much for me about um, lessening that distinction between the self and the other, whether it's the human child who's a little bit different, or whether it's the animals that are a different species, and just to realize that they are connected to us and we are connected to them. And as you say, to make those bridges through empathy, because if you can have empathy for animals, then you're going to have more empathy for children, for people as well.
So, I've often heard, even in healing circles or therapists, play therapists often suggest that a child going through trauma should perhaps connect with a pet, a dog, a cat, or a horse. I've heard horses used as a very sort of, significant part of the healing of trauma. I think this book would work. Have you used it in any kind of healing circles, trauma circles? For children? I'm just thinking more sort of off the cuff.
But it's a fantastic idea. It really is. Yeah.
I would
I,
definitely recommend it.
Yeah, I think the idea, the point is that when children have been hurt by humans and that connection has been severed, then animals are completely non-judgmental and they give love so easily, and it's almost like they pour love back to them from the damaged child. So thank you for that. Yeah, it's a wonderful idea.
And then speaking of humans, you have the concept in the book of while they're speaking animalese, they have was it called the big the bad world out there, where you have a section where they get into trouble,
Yeah,
the bad side of the world, right? And you speak about the
the
antagonist being the unhuman. Yes. So I don't think this is too much of a spoiler. If you want to just speak to us a little bit about the unhuman and creating in children this idea that, that people make bad choices and you can do better.
Yeah, and I really do have that belief that you lose your humanity. There are people who work in industries like scientific research using animals, and because it's scientific, there's a way that they don't have to deal with the impact of what they're doing. But I believe that they lose bit by bit. They actually lose their humanity and their hearts. So that's a concept of the unhumans, that they have just become so inhuman that they no longer have a heart. And Jasper, before the adventure, has too many similarities for comfort, as his friends point out, with the unhumans. And so they choose him to be the problem solver because they say, well, you like them in one way or another, so you'll be able to, find the way of beating them because of the similarity. So yeah, I had fun with that. I did enjoy it.
Certainly it shows. And also giving your reader the idea that they can solve some of the problems that we're faced with in the world, no matter how young they are.
Yeah, and that's part of the concept of the adventure story, and that's part of what is lost with this unwilding of children is that this ability to problem solve and not to have to rely on chatbot or Google to give you all the solutions, but to be out in the wilderness and have to problem solve and make things happen and to get confidence in your own survival. I think that's really important, and I think that's what nature gives.
I think you're right. I think we live in a world where instinct is a lot more muted because we have so many tools to rely on to do the thing for us. And now with the advent of AI, not that I'm, tech phobic, but with the advent of AI, one wonders how much of humanness, of humanity, will be less reliant upon.
We all nervous about it, yes, and quite rightly so, because the more you give over, I have a friend whose son was upset with the school because they brought in a rule that he didn't like, so he got chatbot to write a letter to the headmaster for him. And he gave the instructions. It must be respectful, he said to chatbot, and it must contain these items. But the ability to actually do our own thinking and our own writing and our own problem solving, I think for the generations coming up, I don't know what that's going to do to the frontal lobes, to the cerebral cortex in these generations, because it's so much of it will be done for them. Yeah, and where does that leave us? Leaves us quite superfluous in our own lives.
It does, absolutely. I mean, I start to think in terms of if poetry, music, and books start, sort of are taken over by artificial intelligence. I mean, on the one hand, it's producing content, and that's fine or whatever. But from a human perspective, from the artist's perspective that I'm looking at, it's a huge loss. Not for myself, who's already been through the process, but for a future generation who might not really engage the material, go through sort of the heartbreak, the brutality of writing and creating, taking from inside and putting it out there.
Yeah, I do have hope though, because I think that drive to create, for some people, yes, it might just be about the finished product and no matter who's done it. But I think for most artists, it's that engagement with the work and that journey that is taken, which gives us the result, which is our own internal changes. So, and it's also a way for us to connect with the higher power, whoever you believe your higher power is, the creator that's created this incredible creation that we are part of. And our creativity is a way of connecting and noting and giving back. And if you hand all that over to AI, there isn't much point really.
Well, I appreciate that sentiment because you really, I mean, I think what you're saying is that we have an impetus to create, whatever that art form might be.
Yeah, I think we do. Yeah, and it might change in form, but I think that impetus will always be there.
So what can we hope to see ahead from you? And is there more on the pipelines for the Big Scary Adventure? Is it a series? Will there be, more to look forward to?
Well, my original intention was that there would be sequels, and I have one which was half done, and then you know how it is, you get interrupted by life and work and all the rest of it, and you lose the train of thought. But at some point I'll resume that. So that's one of the projects, yeah. And the others, there's always some, I'm sure with you as well, there's always some unfinished manuscripts just lying in the drawer, waiting for the right time to be taken out and resumed and reworked and finished. So we'll see.
Absolutely looking forward to it. Ilana, thank you so much for giving us your time this evening. It was a huge pleasure to read The Big Scary Adventure. So I know that I'll be looking forward to more from you.
And thank you so much for the invitation. It's been wonderful. Thank you.
It was an absolute pleasure. And we wish you all the best, as I said, with future writing and future publications. Thanks once again for being on BookBytes.
Thank you.
And so there you have it. We spoke to local author Elena Bregin about The Big Scary Adventure. Please look out for more of her works. I've had the absolute pleasure over the years of reading numerous of her titles. Support local literature and you won't be disappointed. That's it from this weekend's edition of Book Bites. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.